The glow of the computer screen was the only real light in the room, painting everything in shades of blue and white. It was late, past midnight, and the world outside his small apartment was quiet. But inside, the digital world of Ethelgerd was alive with the clashing of swords and the roar of mythical beasts. He leaned back in his worn-out office chair, the kind that squeaked with every slight movement, and rubbed his tired eyes. Another long day of staring at code had melted away, replaced by the focus and adrenaline of the game. This was his escape, his weekly ritual with his two best friends. They had been doing this for years, ever since college. It was their way of staying connected, of being a team even when life tried to pull them in different directions, but tonight something was wrong. The team felt incomplete. On the screen, his character, a heavily armored knight, stood next to his friend's archer. But the fourth spot, the spot for their healer, was empty. It had been empty for 3 weeks now. Their usual healer and close friend had moved across the country for a new job, and the void he left behind was felt more deeply than any of them wanted to admit. They had tried playing with random people from the game's matchmaking system, but it was never the same. They were either too loud, too quiet, or had no idea what they were doing, leading to frustrating defeats and wasted nights. "Man, this is just not working," his friend's voice crackled through his headset. It was Mark, the practical one of the group. "We spent 2 hours just to get wiped at the first boss again." "I know," he replied, his voice a low grumble. He controlled his knight, sheathing his sword in the game's main city, a sprawling hub of activity that felt lonely without their fourth member. "It's the coordination. We don't know these people. We can't read their moves. What we need," piped in the other friend, David, "is a real person. Someone we can talk to. Someone who gets it." He sighed, swirling the dregs of his cold coffee in a mug that had a chip on the rim. "And where are we supposed to find one? It's not like you can just put up a help wanted sign for a video game." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a moment of static-filled silence. "Actually," Mark said slowly, thoughtfully, "I might have an idea. My cousin, she plays a lot." He immediately felt a wave of skepticism. A cousin? And a girl? It wasn't that he thought girls were bad at games, not at all. He'd played with plenty of skilled female players over the years. It was just their group. It was a specific vibe. It was built on years of inside jokes and a shared, slightly sarcastic sense of humor. Bringing in an outsider, especially one he didn't know, felt risky. What if she didn't get their jokes? What if she was overly serious? Or worse, what if she was one of those players who just wanted everything handed to them? "Your cousin?" he asked, trying to keep the doubt out of his voice. "Are you sure she's, good? We're not trying to carry someone through these raids. They're hard." "Dude, she's not just good," Mark insisted, a hint of pride in his voice. "She's legit. She used to raid competitively in another game. She knows the mechanics, she knows how to listen, and she doesn't panic. I'm telling you, she'd be perfect." He wasn't convinced. He stared at the empty spot on his screen, a visual representation of their problem. The thought of spending another night failing with a random stranger was exhausting. But the thought of inviting a stranger into their little circle was almost equally stressful. He was a creature of habit. He liked things to be predictable, to work the way they were supposed to. This felt like a wild card. "What's her name?" David asked, breaking the silence. "Chloe," Mark said. He rolled the name around in his head. It was a nice name, simple and pretty. But that didn't tell him anything about her skills as a player. "I don't know, man," he finally said, running a hand through his messy hair. "This feels weird. Just asking some random person to join us." "She's not a random person, she's my cousin," Mark countered. "Look, just talk to her. The worst that can happen is she says no, and we're right back where we started, right?" He had a point. The worst case scenario was no change at all. And the best case scenario? Well, the best case scenario was that they found a new teammate and things could go back to normal. The thought of having a successful run again, of beating that boss that had been taunting them for weeks, was too tempting to ignore. The frustration of the past few weeks had worn him down. "Okay," he said, letting out a long breath. "Okay, fine. What's her username?" I'll message her." Mark rattled off a string of letters and numbers, and he typed it into the game's social panel. A profile popped up. The avatar was a simple, stylized drawing of a cat wearing headphones. Her status message read, "Probably rating or napping." Maybe both. It was a little bit funny, a little bit quirky. It didn't scream hardcore gamer, but it didn't scream newbie either. It was just neutral. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. What was he supposed to say? "Hey, your cousin says you're good at video games? Want to hang out with us?" That sounded desperate and a little creepy. He needed to be cool, to be casual. He needed to make it sound like a business arrangement, a simple transaction. That's all it was, after all. He needed a skill, and she supposedly had it. It wasn't a date. It wasn't an invitation to be best friends. It was just filling a slot. He deleted his first few attempts, each one sounding too friendly or too awkward. Finally, he settled on something direct and to the point. It was his comfort zone. He stripped out all the extra fluff, all the polite niceties, and got straight to business. "Hey," he typed. "Mark said you play Ethelgerd. We need a fourth for a raid tomorrow night. You know the mechanics?" He read it over. It was blunt. A little cold, maybe, but it was efficient. It asked exactly what he needed to know. It treated her like a professional applying for a job, which is exactly how he wanted to approach this. No expectations, no pressure. Just a simple question. He took a deep breath and hit the send button. The message disappeared into the digital void. And then he waited. The silence in his headset was deafening. Mark and David had wisely muted themselves, letting him handle this in his own way. He stared at the chat log, his sent message sitting there, stark and official. He suddenly felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. What if she was offended by his bluntness? What if she thought he was a jerk? He hadn't even considered that. He was so focused on her gaming skills that he hadn't thought about his social skills. He got up from his chair and walked to the small kitchen of his apartment, opening the fridge and staring blankly at its contents. A carton of milk, some leftover pizza, a jar of pickles. Nothing appealed to him. He was too busy replaying the message in his head, second-guessing every word. Maybe he should have added a please or a thank you. Maybe he should have started with a hi, how are you? Just as he was about to close the fridge in defeat, he heard it. A soft ding from his computer. A notification. He rushed back to his desk, his heart thumping a little faster than he'd care to admit. There, in the chat log, was a new message from her. It was short, just like his. There was no greeting, no smiley face, no extra fluff. "Yep, what time?" He stared at the two words. A wave of relief washed over him, so strong it almost made him laugh. She was direct. She was efficient. She got straight to the point. He didn't know her at all, but in that moment he felt like he understood her perfectly. She was a problem solver, just like him. A small smile touched his lips as he typed back the time. He still thought of her as just a slot filler, a temporary solution to their problem. He was just a guy asking someone to play a game. He had no idea that he had just taken the first step on a path that would change his entire life. The next evening, he found himself checking the clock far more often than usual. The familiar blue light of the game's login screen stared back at him, but tonight it felt different. There was an undercurrent of anticipation, a slight buzz of nervous energy that had nothing to do with the difficult digital monsters they were about to face. His friends were already online, their avatars standing in the main city, bouncing on the balls of their virtual feet. "She's not on yet," David's voice announced, a little too loudly in his headset. "You sure she's coming?" "Chill," Mark replied. "She said she would. She's not late." He just stayed quiet, his eyes flicking to the friends list every few seconds. Then a name lit up. Her name. A moment later, a character materialized next to them, a small, robed figure with a glowing staff, a healer class. It was a simple, unassuming character, Not flashy or overly decorated like so many others, a soft, clear voice came through his headset, a little tentative at first. "Hey, am I in the right place?" "That's her," Mark said, a note of triumph in his voice. "Yeah, you're good. Everyone, this is my cousin." There was a chorus of "Heys" and "What's ups?" He just managed a quiet, "Hey, thanks for coming." "No problem," she replied. "Ready to get this done?" Her tone was all business, and he felt a wave of relief. This was what he wanted. A professional. They queued up for the raid, and the loading screen filled his monitor, a dramatic painting of a dragon atop a fiery mountain. The moment they zoned into the dungeon, the atmosphere changed. The air crackled with tension. The first few encounters were a blur of coordinated attacks and healing spells. Her voice was a steady, calming presence in the chaos. "Big hit on the tank in 3 seconds," she'd say calmly. And a protective shield would magically appear on his character just as a monster's giant claw came down. "Add on the left, David, take it down." He was impressed. Deeply impressed. She wasn't just good. She was reading the flow of the battle like a book. She anticipated moves before they happened, her healing perfectly timed, her instructions clear and concise. It was like they had been playing with her for years. They reached the first boss, a hulking beast made of stone and lava, a fight that had caused them to wipe countless times before. The fight was intense. Fireballs rained down from the ceiling, and the boss slammed the ground, sending out shockwaves of molten rock. His health bar plummeted. He braced for the familiar black and white screen of defeat, but it never came. A surge of powerful healing washed over his character, bringing him back from the brink. He saw her character dart in, plant a quick spell, and dart back out, avoiding danger with an ease that seemed almost effortless. "Focus on the smaller crystals when they spawn," she commanded, her voice still level even as the situation looked dire. "I can keep the tank up, but we can't handle the extra damage." They followed her lead. The chaotic mess of a fight suddenly had a strategy. Within a minute, the colossal beast crumbled into a pile of glowing rocks. A treasure chest appeared. They had done it. On the first try, a moment of stunned silence filled the audio channel, broken by David whooping with joy. "Dude, that was amazing!" "Where did you learn to do that?" "It's just a matter of watching the timers," she said, her modesty disarming. "You guys did great damage. Made it easy." He found himself smiling, a genuine, wide smile that he was glad no one could see. He had been so focused on finding a competent player, but he hadn't expected to enjoy the process so much. The rest of the raid went just as smoothly. They cleared the dungeon with a confidence they hadn't felt in months. When they finally teleported back to the main city, no one logged off. Usually they'd all say their goodnights and disappear. But tonight, the conversation kept going. It started with the game, with them recounting cool moments and laughing about a close call. Then Mark asked her what she was up to that weekend. "Probably just watching some old movies," she said. "I'm on a big 80s kick right now." That opened the floodgates. For the next hour, they talked about everything but the game. They debated the best classic comedies, complained about the price of movie tickets, and discovered a shared, obscure love for a forgotten animated film from their childhood. He found himself leaning closer to the microphone, as if that could somehow bring her closer. He'd say something and she'd laugh, a real, warm laugh that made his own smile widen. It was strange. He was sitting alone in a quiet room, but he didn't feel alone at all. He felt more connected than he had in a long time. The weeks started to blur together in the best kind of way. Their weekly raid became a guaranteed highlight. They became an unstoppable team, but more importantly, they became friends. The post-game conversations became longer and more personal. He learned about her frustrating commute to her graphic design job, and she heard about his annoying neighbor who played music too loud. They shared stories about their families, their dreams, and their silly, everyday annoyances. He started looking forward to their chats more than the game itself. He'd find himself thinking about a joke she made during the day, and a small smile would appear on his face. He started logging on a little earlier just in case she was on, hoping to steal a few minutes to talk to her before the others showed up. He noticed the little things, the way her voice got a little softer when she was tired, the excited pitch it took when she was talking about a new art project she was working on. He was learning her not just as a player, but as a person he really, really liked. One night, after a particularly successful raid and a long, laughter-filled chat, he finally logged off. The silence of his apartment suddenly felt heavy. The glow of the monitor faded, leaving him in the dark. He sat there for a long time, just thinking. He had asked a girl to play a video game because he needed a fourth person. He had wanted a teammate, a temporary fix to a problem. But somewhere along the line, without him even noticing, the game had become just an excuse. The real reason he was logging on every week was to talk to the girl with the calm voice and the great laugh. He still thought of her as a friend, a fantastic teammate. But a warm, unfamiliar feeling was starting to grow in his chest, a feeling that had nothing to do with pixels or loot or winning. He just shook his head, smiled to himself in the dark, and went to bed, not yet ready to admit what his heart was already starting to figure out. The weeks that followed settled into a comfortable, predictable rhythm. Every Thursday night felt like a small weekly holiday he found himself looking forward to all week. The game had become secondary, a backdrop for the real event, their conversation. He learned the little cadences of her voice, the way it would get higher and faster when she was excited about a new design project, or how it would soften into a near whisper when she was tired after a long day. Their inside jokes grew, branching off from the game and into their real lives until they had a whole world of shared references that only the two of them understood. His friends noticed, of course. They'd tease him good-naturedly about how he only ever seemed to log on when she was online, but he'd just brush it off. He told himself they were just good friends, and in a way they were. But it was a friendship that felt different, warmer, and more important than any he'd had before. One particular Thursday, the vibe was off from the start. She was quiet when she logged on, her usual cheerful greeting replaced with a muted, "Hey." He asked if she was okay, and she just said she was a little tired. He accepted it, not wanting to pry. But as they made their way through the raid, her silence grew heavier. It wasn't just that she wasn't talking. Her gameplay was affected too. Her movements, usually so precise and fluid, were hesitant. She was a half-second too slow on a heal, a step out of position on a dodge. It was subtle, the kind of thing a random player wouldn't even notice, but he saw it. He felt it. It was like watching a virtuoso musician suddenly forget how to play their instrument. His friends, caught up in the heat of the battle, didn't seem to register the change. They called out instructions, celebrated small victories, and complained about the game's mechanics as usual. But he couldn't focus. His attention kept drifting to her character, then to the empty space in the audio channel where her voice should have been. He felt a knot of concern tighten in his stomach. This wasn't just a bad night. Something was wrong. They reached the final boss of the dungeon, a complex fight that required perfect timing and coordination from everyone. The fight was a chaotic dance of fire and shadows. For a while, it seemed like they might pull through despite the tension. But then, at the most critical moment, a giant, swirling vortex of dark energy appeared on the ground, a deadly trap that everyone had to move out of immediately. He saw it. He saw her character standing right in the middle of it. "Chloe, move!" He yelled into his microphone, his voice sharp with panic, but it was too late. She was a second too late. The vortex exploded, her character evaporated in a flash of light, and without their main healer, the rest of the team quickly followed. The screen faded to the grim gray of defeat. A collective groan went through the headset. "Oh, man. So close." David lamented. "What happened there?" Mark asked. That was a weird one. He waited for her to speak, to offer her usual calm analysis of what went wrong. But there was only silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that stretched on for several seconds. Then he heard it. A small, shaky breath. "Guys, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice thick with an emotion he'd never heard from her before. It wasn't frustration. It was something deeper, something broken. "That was my fault. I'm sorry." "Hey, it's just a game. Don't worry about it," Mark said quickly, trying to be reassuring. "Yeah, we'll get him next time." David added, but their words felt hollow. He knew this wasn't about the game. He muted his microphone for the others, leaving a private channel open just for her. The sounds of his friends' chatter faded into the background. "Hey," he said softly, his voice gentler now. "Forget the boss. Are you okay? You've been quiet all night." There was another long pause. He could hear her breathing, slow and unsteady. He pictured her sitting in her own room, maybe hundreds of miles away, feeling alone. The thought made his chest ache. It's my dog," she finally said, her voice cracking on the last word. "Buster, he's really sick." The fantasy world of Ethelgerd, the dragons, the loot, the failed raid, it all instantly evaporated. None of it mattered. All that mattered was the sound of her voice, trembling with a pain that was raw and real. "He's been my best friend since I was a kid," she continued, the words now tumbling out in a rush as if a dam had broken. "I took him to the vet today and they don't know what's wrong. He's just lying there, and he won't eat, and he looks at me with these eyes. And I just feel so helpless." A quiet sob escaped her, a sound so full of vulnerability it felt like a privilege to hear, and a punch to the gut all at once. He didn't know what to say. All the usual platitudes felt useless and cheap. "He'll be okay," or "I'm sure it's not that bad," would be insults to her fear. So he just listened. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and gave her his full attention. He let her talk about the vet visits, the tests, the fear of losing the one constant in her life. He heard her love for her dog in every word. A love so pure and fierce it made him want to reach through the screen and give her a hug. "I'm so sorry," he finally said when she fell silent, his voice barely a whisper. "That sounds incredibly hard. I can't even imagine." "Yeah," she sniffled. "I just feel so stupid for getting so upset over a game." "No," he said, his voice firm. "Don't you ever feel stupid about that? This is real life. The game is just noise. You're what matters." He didn't even realize he was going to say it until the words were out. But as soon as he heard them, he knew they were the truest thing he had ever said. His friends, sensing the private moment, had quietly logged off one by one, leaving the two of them alone in the digital silence. For the next hour, they barely even mentioned the game. He just sat there in the dark, listening to her talk about her dog, about her childhood, about her fears. He wasn't trying to solve her problem. He was just there, a quiet, steady presence on the other end of the line, letting her know she wasn't alone. When they finally said their goodnights, he logged off and sat in the quiet darkness of his room. The glow of the monitor had faded, but he could still see her face in his mind, could still hear the tremor in her voice. He realized that in that hour he had felt more connected to her than he had to anyone in years. He hadn't been thinking about her as a teammate or a friend or even a girl he might have a crush on. He had been thinking about her as a person he cared for deeply, a person whose pain felt like his own. The game, the very thing that had brought them together, had become completely irrelevant. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that something had fundamentally changed. He was no longer just a guy who played games with a girl. He was a man who was falling for the woman on the other side of the screen. The next morning, the first thing he did was check his phone. There were no new messages, but he found himself rereading the last few things they had said the night before. The conversation had felt so important, so real. He had been there for her, and she had let him in. A warm feeling spread through his chest, a feeling of pride and connection. But it was quickly followed by a cold, sharp wave of panic. The easy, casual friendship they had built now felt like something more, something fragile and precious. And he was terrified of breaking it. For the first time, their weekly game night felt like an obligation instead of a treat. All day, a knot of anxiety tightened in his stomach. What was he supposed to say? Should he ask about her dog? What if the news was bad? What if she didn't want to talk about it? He felt like he was walking on a tightrope over a chasm, and one wrong word sent him falling. When he logged on that evening, she was already there. He took a deep breath, trying to sound normal. "Hey," he said, his voice a little too stiff. "Hey," she replied, her voice equally reserved. The silence that followed was heavy and awkward. His friends, blissfully unaware of the new tension, chattered away, but he and she remained quiet. He focused all his energy on the game, calling out targets and strategies with a military precision that felt cold and impersonal. He was building a wall, brick by brick, with every clipped command. He didn't ask about her day, he didn't make a joke. He didn't stray from the script of the game. He thought if he just kept things professional, he could somehow contain the feelings that were threatening to spill out. From her side, the change was glaringly obvious. She had woken up that morning feeling a strange mix of gratitude and embarrassment. She had been so vulnerable, had cried to him over the internet like a teenager. A part of her was grateful for his kindness, but another part of her was worried she had been too much, that she had crossed a line. His cold, distant behavior that night seemed to confirm her worst fears. He was pulling away. She had scared him off with her emotions. The thought stung, especially since she was already dealing with so much worry for her dog. So she mirrored his behavior. She became quiet, her responses short and to the point. She focused on her healing, on the mechanics of the game, and tried to ignore the growing ache in her chest. The next few weeks were a slow, painful unraveling of everything they had built. The game, once a source of so much joy and laughter, became a tense, silent chore. The post-game conversations, which used to stretch for hours, dwindled to a quick "good game, guys," followed by the sound of 3 people logging off almost simultaneously. The silence in his apartment after they logged off felt louder and more lonely than ever before. He missed her. He missed the sound of her laugh, the way she'd get excited about a silly movie, the comfortable ease of their conversations. He found himself replaying their old chats in his head, torturing himself with the memory of how simple things used to be. His friends noticed the shift, of course. "Dude, what's up with you two?" Mark asked one night after she had logged off without a word. "It's like you're not even friends anymore." "Everything's fine," he lied, his voice tight. "Just been a long week." He couldn't explain it. How could he tell them that he had fallen for a girl he had never met, and that his fear of those feelings was ruining everything? It sounded pathetic and ridiculous. So he kept it inside, letting the pressure build. One night, after another silent, awkward raid, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling. He couldn't sleep. The image of her quiet, withdrawn character was burned into his mind. He thought about the night she had cried, about how he had just sat there and listened. In that moment, he had felt closer to her than anyone in his entire life. And what had he done with that connection? He had run away from it. He had built a fortress around his heart, and in doing so, he had locked her out. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. His fear of losing her was the very thing that was causing him to lose her. He was so scared of ruining their friendship that he was actively destroying it with his distance. He would rather face the possibility of rejection and get an answer, any answer, than live in this quiet, painful limbo for one more day. The thought of her thinking he was mad at her or that he didn't care was unbearable. He had been a coward. He had been so focused on protecting himself that he hadn't considered how his actions were making her feel. He sat up in bed, the decision solidifying in his mind with a clarity that pushed away all the fear. He couldn't keep doing this. He had to take a risk. He didn't know what he was going to say or how he was going to say it, but he knew he had to break the silence. He had to be honest, not just with her, but with himself. The comfortable, predictable world he had tried so hard to maintain was gone, and the only way forward was to step into the unknown. He had to find a way to close the distance he had so foolishly created. The silence that followed his decision was the loudest thing he had ever heard. For weeks, he had been hiding behind a wall of silence he had built himself. And now, the thought of tearing it down was terrifying. He knew he couldn't do it over the game, with their friends listening in. It had to be just her. He picked up his phone, his fingers feeling clumsy and large. The glowing screen seemed to mock him, a blank canvas waiting for him to either paint his future or make a complete fool of himself. He opened their messaging app, the same one they used to coordinate game times, and stared at the empty text box. He started typing, then deleted it. "Hey, are you free to talk?" Was too vague. "We need to talk" sounded like a breakup and they weren't even together. He took a deep breath and tried to think about what he would want to hear if he were in her shoes. He needed to be clear, but he also needed to be kind. He needed to show her that his recent distance wasn't her fault. Finally, he settled on an approach that felt both honest and respectful of the strange, digital world they inhabited. He typed out the words, his heart thumping a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "Hey, forget the game this week. Would you want to get a coffee on Saturday? In person?" He read it over a dozen times. It was simple. It was direct. And it was the biggest risk he had ever taken. Before he could second-guess himself, he hit send. The next few seconds felt like an eternity. He watched the 3 little dots appear and disappear, as if she was typing and deleting just as he had. He imagined her on the other end, feeling the same anxiety, the same hope. Then a message popped up. It was short, but it was everything. "I'd love to." A wave of relief so powerful it made him dizzy washed over him. He flopped back onto his bed, a huge, goofy grin spreading across his face. They spent the next few messages figuring out the details, a small, independent coffee shop that was roughly in the middle of where they both lived. As he put his phone down, the reality of what he had just done set in. He was going to meet her. The girl from the game. The girl with the calming voice and the sharp wit. The girl he had been falling for. The days leading up to Saturday were a strange mix of excitement and pure, unadulterated nerves. He found himself talking to his reflection in the mirror, practicing what he might say. "So nice weather we're having?" "No, that was terrible." "I'm really glad you could make it." "A bit better." He changed his outfit 3 times on Saturday morning, settling on a clean, simple sweater and his favorite jeans, hoping it struck the right balance between looking like he cared and not looking like he was trying too hard. His stomach was a mess of butterflies as he drove to the coffee shop, his hands sweating on the steering wheel. He got there a few minutes early and found a small table in the corner. He ordered a black coffee, his hands trembling slightly as he handed over his money, and then just sat there, watching the door. Every time the little bell above it jingled, his heart leaped into his throat. And then she walked in. He recognized her instantly, even though he had never seen a picture of her. It was the way she carried herself, a quiet confidence mixed with a hint of shyness as she scanned the room. She was wearing a simple coat and a scarf, and when her eyes found his, she broke into a small, hesitant smile. It was the same smile he had pictured 100 times, but seeing it in person was like seeing a color for the first time. He stood up, feeling awkward and gangly. "Hey," he said, his voice sounding a little rougher than he intended. "Hey," she replied, her voice just as clear and warm in person as it was through his headset. There was a moment of slightly awkward silence as they stood there. 2 people who knew each other so intimately yet were complete strangers. "It's so good to finally meet you," he finally managed to say, gesturing for her to sit. "You too," she said, shrugging off her coat. "This is weird, right? But in a good way." "Yeah," he laughed, the sound breaking the tension. "A good kind of weird." They started talking, and at first it was a little stilted. They talked about the drive over, about the coffee shop, about the weather. But then she made a dry, witty comment about the abstract art on the wall, and he fired back with a joke of his own. And just like that, the wall came down. They fell back into their easy rhythm, the same one they had online, but it was richer now, fuller. He could see the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed. He could see her hands move as she got excited, telling a story about a frustrating client at work. He could see the real person behind the avatar, and she was more wonderful than he had ever imagined. They talked for hours, the coffee growing cold in their mugs. They talked about everything and nothing, about their childhoods, their favorite books, their dreams for the future. He told her about his fear of messing up their friendship, and she confessed that she thought he had been angry with her for being too emotional. They cleared the air, and with every word, the space between them shrank. Finally, as the afternoon sun began to fade, casting long shadows across the room, he knew he couldn't leave without saying the thing that had been weighing on his heart for weeks. He took a deep breath, his heart pounding again, but this time it wasn't from fear, but from hope. He looked her directly in the eyes. "I have to be honest," he started, his voice low and serious. "The reason I asked you to get coffee is not just because I wanted to be friends." He paused, gathering his courage. "I asked you to play a game with me because I needed a teammate. But I think I was just looking for an excuse to meet my future wife." The words hung in the air between them, bold and vulnerable. He watched her face, searching for a reaction. For a moment, she just looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then a slow, beautiful smile spread across her face, a smile that reached her eyes and made them sparkle. She let out a soft laugh, a sound of pure, unadulterated happiness. "Funny," she said softly, reaching across the table and taking his hand. Her touch was warm and real, sending a jolt of electricity through him. "I was just playing along until I could meet my husband."